try. So I'm gonna record. I think we're ready.
Okay. So Elsa and Damy, we are both working on a Justice and Joy curriculum map that we have put together that is based off of a Wit and Wisdom module for first graders, but we're going to adapt it for third just because we're kind of adding a little bit more big ideas and things that, writing components that the first graders may or may not be able to do. But I would like to incorporate some of this in my own first grade classroom. And you can go ahead. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start working backwards. We had talked about a culminating activity. We are going to read some different Cinderella stories from around the world and do some different art pieces and, social justice conversations we're going to have with the kids. And we're going to also teach them some components of grammar and literacy and talk about the history. And so for the culminating activity, we decided that the students will be given a choice of multiple self-expression assessments and therefore bringing the joy, because we'd like to give them a choice to either create a piece of artwork or a video, or they can write a narrative, or they can use technology to write a book. They can do pieces of origami, they can present a dramatic play. And this is all going to be the final culmination of a written story that they're going to write their own version of Cinderella. The essential question for the unit is, how do the characters in the different Cinderella stories see themselves as unique and valuable? And how do you compare yourself with the Cinderella story character traits? And the reason we chose that is because we really wanted to dive into that first skill set of first identifying yourself and your own race and gender and your place in the world. And so they can do that comparing their life with Cinderella. And then the standard for the third grade is to recount stories, including fables, folktales, myths, and fairy tales. And this also has a determining the central message, the lesson, the moral of the story, explaining how it's conveyed, using all the key details, and explaining how the details helped communicate the ideas in the story.
Okay, so this curriculum map was creating and taking into consideration the 5 pursuits framework that Muhammad's book talks about. So it's using the Hill model, and we kind of used the evaluation tool on pages 158 and 1 through 160, where it talks about the five pursuits of curriculum framework. So the first is identity. So we wanted to provide the students the opportunities to explore their own and other cultural identities in a positive way. We wanted to provide content from different perspectives and backgrounds, helping the students discover and affirm their identities. So that is the identity development. Then we also wanted to include the skill development. So in this curriculum, we ensured that the students had the different or ample opportunities to learn about the diversity of the content area skills by exploring multimodal texts. Then the students obviously are going to enhance their listening, their reading, their speaking, their writing, their critical thinking, and building on those competencies that are both academic and life oriented. Also, we wanted to ensure that the curriculum encourages the students to engage in active learning about people, places, things, and history through critical thinking and inquiry. So, which that addresses the intellect development of the students. Then we also wanted to include the criticality. The curriculum allows the students to explore topics such as inequalities, oppression related to humanity, historically excluded people, systematic power, etc. So all within this framework and the stories they're going to read, we're going to address that criticality component. And finally, we also included or ensured that our curriculum, especially the activities, included learning experiences that inspire the engagement and deeper connection, and create this sense of joy and happiness around the students, and how they relate to the stories and how they can identify themselves with the people in the different stories that we're going to read. So,
And the first week, we're going to do a deep dive into the most well-known story that was written by Charles Perrault. This was in 1697 of Cinderella. And we'd like to have the children talk about what makes Cinderella valuable beyond her beauty, who holds the power in the story and who doesn't, and which characters represent the unjust authority, and does this remind you of anything in real life, so that the kids can kind of really start thinking about the message in the story and identifying with her, and looking at the different character traits of the different characters in the story. And the themes and the topics, we really want the kids to understand that, Cinderella is a well-loved character because of her kindness, because of her perseverance. And then there are some themes in the story that we can relate to real life, like injustice and privilege and the generosity of people, and then people's self-worth. So some of the vocabulary that the kids will have to kind of dive into also is admire, mocked, scolded, forgiving, honest, culture, character, jealousy. And then we're going to focus on some grammatical points, because this is really going to be mostly, an ELA lesson on writing and reading and story comprehension. So we will look at producing expanded complete sentences, the compound sentences, using exclamatory sentences, and then frequently occurring conjunctions, so that they can write longer sentences using and, but, and so. And then we would like to kind of integrate a little bit of some social studies, some historical knowledge of 17th century France, because that is where this first story takes place, and let the kids kind of know what life was like for people in France at that time. And the skills that we'd like the kids to do is retelling the story. This is something that they're doing in Wit and Wisdom from first grade, and so it should be easy for them. It's a conversation that is had. You can do a think, pair, share. The kids can talk about it with you. They are going to identify the character, setting, and problem, and the resolution, all the key elements. And then we want to start integrating more of the justice and joy by connecting personal experiences related to the story, such as the issues of social inequalities. They can do written or oral expressions, so that's some differentiation depending on what the kids are capable of doing. And we want them to incorporate some of the vocabulary from the theme. And using Socratic seminar, we'd like to ask the students to have a discussion, and if they were to reimagine justice for Cinderella, like what could true justice look like for her? Does she have to have a magic? Could she save herself? Could the community step in and help her? Or, does it have to be a Prince Charming in the end? So we can start having those conversations. And then discussing also how you can cultivate joy in your own life, because that's what Cinderella was also beloved for, is that even though she was treated so poorly, she still kind of sought out that justice and cultivated it in her own life. And then maybe the kids could plan some acts of kindness around the school to kind of act on that. Some of the assessments that we would like to have for the first week are just some written things, like choosing a trait about Cinderella and writing an opinion paragraph. So that's part of a skill assessment. Also having the students reflect on their own identity. And then this is also something that they could do as an assessment, as a poster, so they could present it to the class. And this would be showing the class about what they've discovered about their own identity within their family, within their friends, within their culture and community, and as a student, and just kind of listing all the things that place them in this world. And then if they were to do a partner work or writing or music or just something fun to kind of demonstrate that they have learned that main message in the story, because that's going to carry through all of these stories in our unit. And so if they can demonstrate some understanding of the moral of the story and the key message, and we'll give them some choices in that, so that it's not just sitting and writing all the time. And that'll get our unit started.
All right, for Unit 1, Week 2, I just want to bring it up that we have an essential question for all the units, but then we also have focusing questions or compelling and enduring questions for each week. So in each week, students are going to have the opportunity to interact with the text, the different texts, and think critically about the issues that we're bringing or presenting each week. On week 2, we're going to read this beautiful story, which is called The Pear Blossom, is the Korean version of the Cinderella. And this week, students are going to have to answer the question in how the society's expectations affect Cinderella, how Cinderella should behave within the norms. We know that Asian culture could be a very strict or rigid culture, and therefore people are subject sometimes to those norms in society. So the students are going to have that empathy to analyze the story from Cinderella and connect it to their own lives. So that is relevant because their identities is reflected. They create that sense of social identity, which is part of our themes, or discussing the stereotypes or privilege or equity, but yet at the same time, that inner goodness that all Cinderellas, because we love that story, right? So that we all love about Cinderella, that despite the challenges and the adversities, she still keeps that inner goodness within herself, and that was also part of that mental health that we're going to bring the topic to discussion with the students. So we also are going to discuss race, because that's important point that where students can talk about races or people from different backgrounds and different skin colors. So that is a topic that does not have to be taboo in our schools. We need to discuss how we treat people who speak differently, who act differently than we do, or that eat different food than we do. So that vocabulary we're going to cover will be community, beauty, gratitude, grumble and exclaim, deserve, equality, and emotional intelligence will be topics that we discuss, because we believe it's important to cover all those topics within our Cinderella story. The grammatical points that we're going to cover will be using possessives and pronouns, and then we're going to have them write complete thoughts using proper spelling conventions and syntax. And the historical event we're going to bring will be the Korean War. So then the skills, we want students to express relevant ideas, details, and express them in a clear way. We're going to answer questions, so a lot of comprehension topics that go around the Cinderella theme. They're going to express their opinions. We're going to provide sentence stems so that students can elaborate in their questions or in their answers. We're also going to emphasize on the writing, from the story to cite major details like the character, the plot, the setting, the antagonist, the protagonist, all these elements that are part of the story. And then we want them to create a story map based on these events with a resolution. And we may want to be creative here. It's kind of like I like to say, students, well, if you don't see a resolution, what resolution will you give to the story? Kind of like open up their creative mind and see a different perspective of, oh, well, Cinderella can finish in a different way than the expected way or the traditional way. For the assessment, we want to make sure they see beauty. They see the beauty in Cinderella, in the Korean Cinderella. She's not the typical Cinderella we've seen or that we're used to, but yet she's beautiful in her own ways, with her long black hair, with her eyes, with her skin. She's beautiful. So we're gonna try to have that sense of identity, or identifying the beauty in Cinderella, but also connecting to the students' inner beauty and outside beauty. We're going to ask the questions: why do you admire Cinderella? Why is it Cinderella important? What is it important to you? They can bring an artifact that is important to them from their households, because we all have that particular personal artifact that we all like to share and talk about because this is who we are. So they're going to represent their culture, they're going to represent their identity, but maybe bring in an artifact. They can create a slides, they can create a website, they can create a video, they can create a short story that they act out in regards to Cinderella. And so again, they're going to make it that very relevant connection. They can also create a piece of music, a piece of art. So we're going to give them plenty of opportunities for them to represent their knowledge, not just the traditional way. And lastly, we're going to give them the option to maybe interview an expert or interview somebody that has been in like a Cinderella in their home countries or in their places of where they lived, or even in their small town. If they were mistreated like Cinderella was, how was that affected, and the resilience and emotional intelligence that person has to bring to overcome those prejudices or stereotypes. So week 3.
Yep. And then so after reading about the Korean Cinderella, there's another version of Cinderella that comes from Mexico, and it's called Adelita. It's written by Tommy DePaula, and it is a really sweet story about a little girl whose father dies. And again, it's kind of the same story elements, and you're going to go through, but this time there's no glass slippers. It's something different. And so we're going to ask some of the focusing questions for the week. What challenges does Adelita face? What role do kindness and community play in her story? How can we help people who might feel like Adelita? Because she is marginalized in this story, and we want to kind of bring awareness to that with the students right away. The themes and topics for this book, we really want to focus in on the cultural diversity. It's a beautifully illustrated book that has a lot of like traditional Mexican kind of painting and colors. So we can bring that into it as well. Empathy is a big part of the story, solidarity, honor, resilience, and then the community values. The vocabulary in this book, there's quite a bit of Spanish in the story, so they can talk about some of the Spanish vocabulary. And then one of the words is fiesta. What does it mean to be honored? Stunning is a word they use. Rebozo is actually what they use instead of the Cinderella slippers. It's her scarf. It's a traditional Mexican scarf. Meager, despair, and deserve. So we can do some work with maybe Frayer models or some, investigating with the vocabulary, and then have them use that in their writings and in their songs and in their work that they choose. And then once again, with the grammatical points, we're going to continue to ask them to write compound sentences so they're a little more complex, using commas to separate the words in a series, using the personal and possessive pronouns, and then capitalizing dates and names of people. So we'll focus in on some of the traditional skills. And then the historical knowledge in this story is there was actually, when I looked into it, Adelita, there was a group of female soldiers in the Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s, and they called themselves the Adelitas. And so I have a feeling that's where the title of this book and the girl's name came from, because she's kind of a woman warrior, a female soldier. And so that would be interesting to look into that with the children. The academic skills for this, we'd really like to kind of focus in on the illustrations in the book, because they really help tell the story. So we can ask the kids to kind of use the illustrations to describe the events and the setting and conversation. Use the illustrations again to describe Adelita, and also examine the key events in the story. So a lot of story comprehension, using the sentence level context as a clue. So when they find these words like honored and stunning within the sentence, they can use the context around it to figure out the definition. And we can also sort the vocabulary words and see which ones we think are more positive or more negative emotions. Discussing how everyone has multiple identities, because your identity includes much more than just, your gender or your family. It really involves your culture, your family, society, and how that should be celebrated instead of, a concern or weird strangeness, for kids. And then we would like to discuss how joy can be a form of resilience, in all these Cinderella stories. That's part of the theme, and that's kind of her resistance, her form of resistance to oppression. And we'd like to ask, how does Adelita's ability to stay positive and hopeful, even when she's being under these challenging circumstances, how is that serving as a form of personal empowerment for her? And that also brings joy. And the assessments this week are going to be writing an opinion paragraph, again, once what they admire most about Adelita and kind of use those supporting evidence. And then they can also start writing an opinion about some sense of closure for a story if they were to write like a different ending, because sometimes the books kind of wrap up with, the male character writing in and saving, and we can talk about how maybe there's a different way that the book can end, and what do they think about that. And then using Venn diagrams would be a great way to kind of compare and contrast the different Cinderella stories. And then also maybe some journal writing, just kind of, not so formal, and see what they want to write about, how they think they could like to make a difference in their own community. So maybe they can start getting together with partners and talking about some sort of social action that they might take, or even writing a letter to somebody to make a change. And then I thought it would be fun to design your own rebozo, because the shawl is this beautiful, like tapestry kind of, with all the Mexican colors and the joyful colors of Mexico. And they could use oil pastels and watercolor and just kind of make it their own. And maybe they could even tie in some symbols that represent them and their joy in life. So we're trying to continue to integrate the writing within also some more art forms and different ways to continue to bring the joy to the class.
And last but not least, we are going to have students to explore their favorite hero. And for the sake of time, this week is sort of like a summary of all the previous weeks, incorporating other issues or topics of social justice and joy. But we're going to give our students the opportunity to create their own hero, to have a vision board, to create an origami, to draw their own hero, to write a poem, anything that supports our essential questions. So anything that supports our theme. And as a culminating activity, we're just going to compile all these assignments as formative assessments. If there's any students that we know are high flyers, are academically gifted, we're going to give them a specific assignment, or answer questions, or write a journal or a paragraph. But for the other students, we want to consider their different abilities, and so we want to give them all the opportunity to to express that self empowerment through different ways to express what they know. Obviously, respecting their culture, respecting their identity, and bringing that sense of joy in their learning into their learning. So the conclusion we come up with about our curriculum map is that it's predominantly learner-centered, because it addresses the issues of social justice through the stories, vocabulary, and historical facts. It's also we ensure that included the joy in all the activities and assessments that we did. There are some themes about social reconstruction, because it underlies the view of social dynamics within our culture. There's definitely leadership actions that are brought to light. For the academic connection, we have ELA standards, and our curriculum is definitely culturally, linguistically, and historically responsive. So thank you so much.